All right, folks. No matter where in the world you are, it is right now time to hang with Harley. He's a man who needs no introduction. Harley Schlanger is here, and he's going to break down for us all the geopolitical news and information that is absolutely vital to all of you. You can follow Harley's work over at theschillerinstitute.org, theschillerinstitute.org, as well as larouchepack.com, larouchepack.com. With that being said, Harley, how are you, sir?
V, I've been missing you.
I missed you too, man. You know, it's a I wish I saw you the last time
More
you were
complex,
down
aren't
here.
they? Schedules
Say
get
again?
more complex.
It is. It really has been more complex. Um,
Well, it's
but
partly good because it means a lot is happening.
tremendous amounts of things is happening. You see the frolicking idiots over at NATO who are calling for nuclear strikes, and meanwhile Trump is he's pushing dialogue with China and Russia, which is awesome. Now that the Mueller investigation is laid to rest, we have Congressman Nunez, who has offered criminal what's the criminal
Referrals.
referrals. That's right, criminal referrals, with more criminal referrals coming. And also, AG Barr, Bill Barr, is going to be investigating what happened with the FISA warrants, as well as the FBI, and investigating them thoroughly. You have the IG Huber, who is also investigating what has happened with not only FISA, but also Uranium One, the Clinton Foundation. My God, Harley, there's so many things that are happening right now. And I kind of feel that we are heading for a summer offensive, finally.
Well, my latest article is titled Trump on the Offensive,
Oh, yes.
and Brits escalate in response. I mean, the whole NATO thing is absurd.
Right.
The situation in Europe, the question that now is, I just met with someone today who's a diplomat who was saying, the question is, by the time Brexit occurs, will there be an EU to leave? Well, the European Union is disintegrating. You have craziness in Ukraine, where Poroshenko finished a distant second to a comedian. Timoshenko, who is the other preferred candidate for the West, she and Poroshenko together had less than the comedian.
That's wonderful. And you got to love the little war goddess wannabe.
Yeah. Then you've got the situation in Israel where Netanyahu squeaked by. He'll be able to form a coalition because he'll be able to work with the crazies.
Yep.
That may not last long because he may be headed to the clinker.
Yep.
So you've got an incredibly fluid situation, and yet you still see the pessimists out there saying, "Oh, everything's controlled. Trump is controlled. It's all under control. Nothing you can do about it." And it's too bad that so many people have been beaten down, so that they've accepted their own self-incarceration. I guess you could say that's a version of the Stockholm syndrome.
Yes.
And you think the enemy is so strong that the only thing you can do is talk about how strong they are. These guys are idiots. They've backed themselves into a corner on Russiagate. And some people are now saying, well, see, Mueller all along was in on it. That's nonsense. We've had 2.5 years where we've been edging closer and closer to nuclear war because of this whole Russiagate. So the good news is Trump is a little bit unleashed. I wish he'd concentrate more on China and Russia than on the border, although the border's something you've got to keep your eye on. I think they're going to try and use provocations to create a problem. But the good news is that the Mexican government is working with Trump. Putin did a press conference today, and he really had to try hard not to gloat. But what he said is that he was asked about the Mueller investigation, and he said, well, we knew that he'd find nothing. We didn't know whether he'd invent something, but we knew he would find nothing because there was nothing to find.
Mm-hmm.
And he said Trump was vindicated. And he said, look, we've had some problems with Trump, partly because of the internal situation in the U.S., but we look forward to talking. And Trump has said he's going to meet with Putin and Xi Jinping sometime soon.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll get off the ground on some of these things. I know people are impatient. We're dealing with an oligarchy that's been ruling the world for at least the last 2.5 centuries, and they're not going to give up. I don't know, V, if you saw the Washington Post op-ed by the British Foreign Secretary, Hunt. But what did he say? He said, Britain has been shaping the world for 2 centuries. Brexit won't change that. It's an example of whistling past the graveyard. And he had to admit that the Brexit situation, the way it's been handled, looks more like Monty Python than serious statecraft.
Correct.
Well, that's absolutely true, yeah. But I think what's necessary now is for people who are serious about defending the traditions of the American system to start putting forward clear programs and going out and fighting for those programs. We don't have to waste our time countering every little nuance and lie and slander about Russiagate, but we do have to follow through, as you mentioned, with Attorney General Barr, Devin Nunes. We do have to have a time of reckoning for the people who did this to the country. They committed fraud. They ruined people's lives. They put us in a situation where we're close to war with Russia. The situation in Venezuela, which is Pompeo, Pence, and Bolton. I think we have to take the gloves off with those guys. I really think the more I see this, that Trump chose Pence so that people would think twice before they'd impeach him, because Pence is so bad. But Pompeo and Bolton are pushing the very policies Trump campaigned against: regime change. They're supporting the idea of attacking Russia and China at a point at which Trump is saying we're going to be great friends with those countries. And as Helga Zepp-LaRouche said the other day, how can you say you want strategic partnerships with Russia and China and then have your mouthpieces like Bolton and Pompeo go out and say Russia and China are strategic adversaries, not strategic partners? So there's still some work to do. But the good news is that the Rachel Maddows of this world, Adam Schiff is still running his mouth, but I don't think he's sort of like Wile E. Coyote. He's off the cliff and doesn't realize it yet.
Yeah, Adam Schiff for brains, as the president so elegantly calls him. These guys are literally. What are they going to do when all they can do right now is ask for continue going back to asking for tax returns? Threatening to interview. Did you see the whole exchange between Mad Maxine Waters and Steve Mnuchin?
Yeah, sure. Well, Maxine she's hanging on to a self-conception which very few people have of her.
Right.
In her mind, she's the one who's upholding the values of the planet Maxine. Yep. And therefore she can reign on that planet. But I think most of the rest of the country sees her as a nut.
Yeah.
And, I think there are a few Democrats who are serious and are trying to figure out how to regroup.
Sure.
But the issue cannot be partisan. This is the biggest problem, is people who see things as Democrat or Republican or left and right. Because on the Democrat and Republican, it doesn't exist. You have, now that Russiagate's gone, the Republicans are going to be more anti-Russian than the Schumer crowd and the Democrats.
Right.
Marco Rubio is leading a jihad against China. So you have people who are in Trump's party, but they're not online with Trump. And I think what he's got to do is define his priorities. If his priority is the trade deal with China, get it done. If it's working with Russia against terrorism, working with Russia on resolving some of the outstanding problems of Ukraine and Europe, get it done. Sit down and talk to Putin. Working with Xi Jinping and Putin to solve the problem of North Korea, let's get that done. That's what will shut up the people in both parties who are anti-Trump.
When the real heavy hitting, cases start, and the real pushback, the real offensive begins, they're not going to have a leg to stand on, Harley. They literally are not going to have a leg to stand on. He's been very quiet as of late. I haven't seen nor heard anything from Hillary Clinton. She's been extremely quiet. Same thing with Obama's. I think the Obama Last we had it, he was in Europe. I don't know what he's doing. Maybe he's working
He's
on some
hanging
sort
out
of
with,
extradition treaty so he can escape there. I have no idea.
he's hanging out with his buddy Angela Merkel, talking about how to get rid of all energy on the planet.
Oh yeah, the Green New Deal. Let's not forget about
Yeah.
it. The Death New Deal. Right. The new Death Deal.
I mean, Hillary, they're probably rewiring.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
who else is lurking in the shadows now? Who's very frightened is John Brennan. Clapper
Jihad
figures.
Brennan.
Clapper figures the statute of limitation on his lies is already passed, but Brennan is very much a target right now. Look, Mueller is someone who could be targeted for the leaks that went on. And if you're going to blame someone for leaks, he had a bunch of unethical people who were on his prosecutorial team, but he was the head of it.
Yes.
And the media keeps saying, oh, how he held his counsel and he kept things back. That's nonsense. Virtually every other day, the Washington Post or the New York Times had another leak.
Mm-hmm.
And, we'll see what happens with the Roger Stone case. I know Roger is planning not a legal defense, but a legal offense.
Right.
And that's as it should be. But look, what else are they working on? They're working on extraditing Assange and locking him in a basement somewhere, so we'll never hear from him on the Russia question.
Sure.
So, and also this NATO summit, while this was going on, the second leading channel on German television started its Thursday night news magazine story, which is watched by millions, by saying the Russians have invaded Estonia. Russian troops crossed into the Baltic nation today, and NATO, led by the United States and Germany, are pouring troops and jets and fighters into the Baltic countries to repel the Russians.
What in the world?
Well, then there was a moment of silence, and then the guy came on and said, well, this didn't exactly happen yet, but it could happen any day. Can you imagine the panic that causes?
You know what it is? It's a bloated, obsolete bureaucracy begging and pining for its relevance. That's exactly what it is, Harley.
Well, that's what NATO is. But
Yeah.
the German propaganda machine is trying to terrorize the German people. So they'll accept the idea of increasing their funding to NATO. And
Sure.
I think Trump's strategy by demanding that they pay 2% of the each 2% of their budget for NATO is to get them to all drop out of NATO.
Yeah.
Because as he said, NATO is irrelevant. That or as Bill Binney said rather on an interview with me the other day, NATO is obsolete. It doesn't need to exist anymore. Save the money. Or if you want to, bring Russia into NATO and then dissolve it.
There you go. And
So
Russia's a natural fit for us.
Yeah. Especially since some of the unresolved problems are dealing with the terrorists that are spawned out of Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
So, there are solutions to all these things, but what's lacking is a clear intelligence picture. And this is what the British have done with the Integrity Initiative, with the MI6 operations, with their PSYOPs around the world, the Five Eyes deployment. They've mastered the capability of disarming a population from figuring out who its real friends and who its real enemies are and what its real interests are. Now, the British don't have that problem. As Lord Palmerston said 150 years ago, we have no permanent friends, we have permanent interests. And the British interest has been to protect the empire. And they have done it. They've done it effectively. When they no longer could do it through military power, they did it through controlling the offshore islands, the shadow banking system, and so on. Now, that whole thing is about to blow. And in addition to Trump having a diplomatic offensive, working with Russia, China, and others, and having an intelligence offensive by locking up the criminals who were behind Russiagate, the other thing he's got to do is take on the economic problems. And I just saw a series of articles came across my desk today from the Asia Times, from the Singapore paper, the Hong Kong paper, the Calcutta Business Journal. All of them are saying what's going to happen with the uncollectible debt that's been leveraged on corporations, the so-called collateralized leverage obligations.
Mm.
These are unsustainable to the extreme, and they are larger levels of leverage
Mm-hmm.
than we had in 2008. So this is something that could impinge on Trump's reelection, although I think Trump could easily say, well, the Federal Reserve caused it by changing its policy.
Wow.
But that's not going to help. If we have a crash, if you think about what happened in 2000 and then again in 2008, how many people, how many families lost their nest egg, their life savings, their fallback? Uh, if that happens again, uh, all bets are off. This country, the United States, will probably go into chaos. What they're talking about in Britain, for example, with Brexit? You're not going to have food delivered to the grocery stores. You're not going to have gasoline delivered to the pump. That could
Unbelievable.
happen in the United States very easily.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
So you've got to get a Glass-Steagall bill through. And the good news is Marcy Kaptur is trying again. She reintroduced the Return to Prudent Banking Act, which is the Glass-Steagall return. I think this is something that people who are familiar with you and the Rogue Money team know that we've got to put some rules in to stop the speculators. And the first of those rules is restoring Glass-Steagall so that speculators know that if their speculation goes bad, there's no bailout. They can't steal through a bail-in their depositors' money. They have to eat their losses. That's step one. And then step two is a Hamiltonian credit policy. Go ahead and have the government create the credit through the Treasury that will go into the infrastructure that needs to be rebuilt for the economy to function and to create the jobs that are paid that pay decent wages, and that the effect of that on the whole economy will generate more than enough revenue to cover the costs.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense, Harley. That makes perfect sense.
That's probably why it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, because what would that do to all the bloated bureaucracies? I mean, how many of these bureaucrats would be out of work? These departments won't need to exist anymore. You know.
Or
Hey,
all
well,
the
let me ask you this: your thoughts on the potential of a Herman Cain as the Fed president?
Well, I'm not sold on Herman Cain. I think there's a little bit too much of a libertarian streak to him. And I know people think libertarianism is good, but when it comes to banking, you've got to have rules. You got to have some regulations. Now, I've never heard Cain comment on Glass-Steagall. I'd like someone to ask him. Maybe he would surprise me and say he thinks it's a good policy. Trump certainly was pushing it during the campaign. It's in the Republican platform. People can check it. So this is also something you could get Democrats and Republicans working together on. Taking
Yeah.
the power away from Wall Street and the private banks that control the Federal Reserve, that function for themselves first, have no commitment to the nation. I think Herman Cain is a patriot. I think he wants to do what's right. So, let's see what happens. But people like Powell come out of the same economics departments that produced Bernanke and Yellen and all the other bankers before them, who are mostly concerned with the health of the money center banks and not with the economy.
Absolutely. Very well said. Harley, thank you so much for sharing this information with us. And once again, you can find Harley over at the as well as LaRouchePack.com. Harley, last bit of closing statements. Go for it, sir.
Well, this is a time where people who have felt under it for the last 20 years, take a strong cup of coffee and get out and start organizing. We now have the upper hand. Those of you who your friends said you're crazy, you're a conspiracy theorist, everything we said has been proven to be true. The British ran Russiagate with the Obama intelligence networks, with the Bush neocon networks, and they did it not because of Trump per se, but because, or that Trump was a white nationalist or all these other bogus lines. They did it because Trump was breaking with the policy of geopolitics of the British system, the Bush system, the Obama system, the Clinton system. He intended to break it, and I hope he will. And they tried to stop him. We were right. The UV and the people who you had on Rogue Money were absolutely right that this was a criminal conspiracy, which included people like Mueller, Comey, Brennan, Clapper, Bruce and Nellie Orr. You know, the names, some of the names are familiar: Christopher Steele, Sir Richard Dearloff. These are criminals. Now's the time to lock them up and get back to the policy of what it is that America is supposed to do, which is to be a nation of producers whose creativity is unleashed. And that's what was shut down from the time of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. So if people are conflicted or they say Trump isn't doing enough, go out there and help him. He stood up against these criminals. When, you know, I don't think a lot of people thought he could do it, did they?
No, not at
A
all.
lot of people thought he would bend and crack, and he didn't do it. And to me, that's a badge of honor, but it's not enough. Now we've got to clean it up, and now's the time to drain the swamp and start producing something of value.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much for being on with us. And folks, thank you all for listening in. Subscribe, like, share, comment, and also check out our other services, especially the Patreon group that we have and everything else that you can show your support for us. And with that being said, again, Harley, thank you so much.
Okay, V. See you next week.
Cheers.